one of the deep convictions that we have is that what makes Christianity is the incarnation. And the mystery of unity is that the closer God's leaders come to one another, I believe the closer God becomes to the city. It's getting leaders and organizations to work together better and smarter rather than to operate independently of one another.
Welcome to the Lausanne Movement Podcast, where we have a passion to accelerate global mission together. If you like today's episode, won't you take a moment to rate and review our podcast and subscribe? That way you won't miss a thing. And now, for today's interview. Well, Dr. Mac Pierre, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's really great to have you with us today. I'm very keen to dive into the stories that you have about ministry that you've done in New York City over the decades. And we're going to cover a large stream of different questions and different topics. But I'm really just expectant that God is going to inspire us through our conversation today. So to kick us off, you spent a lot of time thinking about cities as a strategic hub for the gospel. Can you share why you believe that cities are so crucial for the global mission of the church today?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question really comes in three parts. One is a theological understanding. When I read the New Testament, it becomes quite evident that the early church really grew through intentional witness by Jesus in Jerusalem and then by Paul in the cities of the first century. The way that I think about the New Testament is that Jesus went to die in Jerusalem as the religious capital of the world, and Paul went to die in Rome as the political capital of the world. So I think about that theologically. I also think about it historically when I look at church growth over the years. One of the amazing data points that is presented in a book called Why Cities Matter is this idea that at the end of the first century, there was an estimated 25,000 Christians. And by the year 312, when Constantine declared himself to be a Christian, the Roman emperor, Christianity had grown from 25,000 to 20 million in 200 years. And the reason that I believe the church grew 800 times in 200 years was the influence of cities in Western Asia and Southern Europe. And then thirdly is experientially. I've seen just the magnetism of cities like New York, London, Singapore, Dubai, and just the powerful ability to convene, to have influence. When we had our first Movement Day gathering 14 years ago in 2010, we thought we would have primarily a group of New Yorkers showing up, and we ended up having people from 34 states and 14 countries that showed up. And it was really to hear the stories of what God was doing in New York. Persons like Tim Keller were a great draw, but I've just seen the influence of cities over our journey the last 4 decades.
So, you've been in New York City for decades now, but what sparked your passion for cities? I, as a younger leader, I'm in a place where passions are beginning to form within me. And I would imagine the same would be true for you. Were there any particular moments or experiences that were significant to you, like getting a passion for cities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there were a few influences. When my wife and I were 21 years old, we were college juniors. We were attending a student missions conference called Urbana, actually the largest missions conference in the history of the church. 17,000 young people were there. And we were challenged by Billy Graham to be available to go anywhere in the world that God would send us. And we responded to that challenge at the time, not knowing it would lead us to New York. But as we began to follow that calling, we ended up in places like some of the great cities in India. We moved to New York 40 years ago, this month, actually, June of 1984. And so some of the passion and the conviction about New York actually grew by actually being here. And then as we began to establish our family and our work here, I was really influenced by the friendship and writings of leaders like Dr. Ray Bakke. Bakke was asked by Billy Graham after the first Lausanne Congress in 1974 to go study the cities of the world. And so Bakke went to 250 cities of 1 million or more and really developed an encyclopedic knowledge of cities in addition to his theological insights into cities. So the passion really was a mix of personal experience, growing understanding, influenced by really important mentors, even to this day.
So could you take us back to the early days? What was your first ministry within New York City?
I came to New York in 1984 as a staff member with InterVarsity. It's a university ministry that was actually birthed out of England, spread to Canada, came to the US in the 1940s. InterVarsity has a large presence on a number of campuses across the US. I became an area director over 15 campuses. We had a staff of 5. But our arrival in New York coincided with really 3 great crises that the city was experiencing. The city was on the verge of bankruptcy. The city had become very violent. By the late 80s, we had 7 consecutive years of 8 murders a day.
Mm.
So the city was just extraordinarily violent. And then the city was also very underchurched. And so there were all these great needs. And we were really drawn, certainly to the campus, but also to the need simply to gather leaders and churches to pray together. We had our first gathering on February 5th, 1988, and I was working with an inner city organization called Here's Life. They were the urban arm of Campus Crusade. We invited 16 churches to come pray together on a Friday night, and 75 churches showed up. And that really seemed to spark something in the hearts and minds of leaders and churches across the region. And we just kept developing that and have been doing so for the last 36 years. And we've had over 2,000 churches involved over the last 4 decades. And that really has shaped a lot of the direction of what we've seen God doing over the past 40 years. We say that we've seen 2 macro answers to prayer. The murder rate declined by 70%, and New York became the safest city in America of more than 1 million people. Last year or 2 since George Floyd, some of that has picked up a little bit. But the other macro answer to prayer was seeing evangelical Christianity grow 500% in 25 years in Manhattan. By the year 2014, there were 60,000 people in church in Manhattan that were not in church in the 1980s.
Wow. I mean, that's a phenomenal growth. And I mean, in many regards, you can almost only attribute that to, the move of God. And even just hearing about the number of churches that have been involved, over 2,000 churches involved in prayer and uniting together in prayer is a phenomenal feat. I mean, as I think about local churches, many local churches struggle just to mobilize 70 people come together in prayer. So I'd be interested. Let's assume that God is moving. You try to gather a small number of churches to come together, 70 arrived. There's a move of God that's happening there. But there's a stewardship that is needed when God is moving to steward what God is providing us as ministry leaders. And so I'd be interested to hear from you. For those church leaders who are struggling to mobilize their people or have a passion to do something very similar within their own city, what advice would you give to pastors and ministry leaders with similar desire?
I would say in some ways it's a study on the nature of movements. Obviously, the most important thing is that whoever has a vision for this, it has to be true of them. They have to embody whatever it is that they're wanting others to become part of. And for me, with that, I mean, that's meant a number of things, but just really trying to maintain a depth of my own spiritual life. One of the disciplines that I began in 2010 was I began to read the Bible every 90 days. And so I've been doing that for 15 years. And that's really deep in my own depth of understanding of God and how he works. Because we believe that the width of our influence will always be in proportion to the depth of our own intimacy with God. So that's a place to start. And then secondly, movements are always preceded by alliances. And what I mean by that is when we did our gathering back in 1988, we enlisted these 16 leaders that we had a relationship with. They trusted us, they knew us. And so we said, we want to have this gathering. Will you come? Will you be part of the program? Will you let us use your photo and some promotional material? And they all said yes. Part of what motivated these leaders to get involved was that they were part of the experience. They were not just observers, but they were helping participate, shape. We really believe that people own what they design. And by allowing as many people as possible to put their fingerprints on something fosters a great sense of ownership in whatever it is that you're doing. And then the other principle, I think, is really what I would call the principle of excellence. Nothing sustains a movement like excellence. When we had our first meeting back in February of 1988, we brought in a tremendous leader, facilitator, really the father of the modern prayer movement, David Bryant. David was on staff with InterVarsity, tremendous speaker, writer, communicator, vision caster. And we had him come in for the first few years, and he really helped us maintain a level of excellence and vision. So you do need people that have some of the right skills to make this happen. But above all else, we just want to cast a very compelling vision. We really believe that if we can cast a compelling vision and people are in this posture of prayer and worship and really inviting God to speak, then God will use that and all kinds of things, even things that you can't predict, will begin to happen. One of our important gatherings every year is what we call a Pastor's Prayer Summit. It began in the Northwest in the US and it's spread all over the world. But we've been doing this now for 35 years. And we take pastors and leaders away for 48 hours once a year. And when we did this back in February of 1995, there was only about 30 of us. In that year, we decided we were going to meet together for 96 hours. So it was very intense, very powerful. And at the end of that 4 days, we committed to create a prayer calendar for our city with the vision of having every day of every month committed to by some church or organization that would pray. And that prayer initiative went uninterrupted for 20 years. And it started with 30 people who committed themselves to each other.
Wow. I mean, that already casts a compelling vision for those of us who are listening. Could you share a few stories about how you saw transformation coming out of these prayer initiatives? You already mentioned the drop in crime rate within New York City, but are there any stories that you could share of God just
Yeah.
breaking through?
Well, a number of things. One of the things we found is that when you have a leadership community that feels like they're hearing God together and then they are informed with some of the great challenges facing the globe, then they really want to act together. One of the great global challenges in the early 2000s was the AIDS pandemic that was ravaging, particularly East and Southern Africa. And I had developed a relationship with World Vision. My wife and I have sponsored children since 1982, beginning in Ethiopia. Over the course of a decade, leaders that had been praying together, they gave me permission to bring them to East Africa. We had 175 leaders that traveled to East Africa together, and collectively, we found 11,000 children that were sponsored. And the metric that World Vision uses is that every sponsored child benefits 60 people. So these 175 leaders working together collaboratively with a really great organization ended up impacting over 600,000 people. And so the root of that was praying together. One of the important understandings about the importance of united prayer is that the greatest challenge in any city is never money, space, or programs. It's always trust.
Sure.
And nothing grows trust faster than simply praying together. Praying together creates trust in an exponential manner that can't happen in any other way. One of the analogies that we were given a few years ago by a Catholic colleague was this idea that leaders who meet together in some kind of rhythm, she said, in a sense, it almost becomes kind of a relational horse. That was her analogy. And she says, when the horse gets big enough, you can pull any cart you want to. The cart might be church planting, it might be a compassion effort, it might be educational, but that's really the essence of movements is you're building this ecosystem of relationships that really aspire to really do world historic things together.
You've already mentioned a few elements that are connected to the nature of movements. And a little bit later, I would love for us to dive a bit deeper into collaborative action and how we can best, collaborate together. But I'd be really interested just to hear from you, maybe from the outset of this conversation. What is at the heart of collaboration? You mentioned like trust is built through prayer. What other elements are needed for a healthy movement to actually get off the ground? I mean, there's all around the world, there's leaders with amazing ideas and passions in their heart, but what takes that from just being an idea to reality?
The place I start with that is, again, is theological, that collaboration is really the pragmatic outworking of Jesus' prayer in John 17. That Jesus prays that we would be one, that we would that becomes the greatest apology to an unbelieving world. So we have to have that common theological conviction. We also have to understand that when God looks at our city, he doesn't primarily see the city divided up with Baptists and Pentecostals and Episcopalians and Lutherans and Catholics. That God looks at the city primarily through the lens of people who belong to him and people who don't. And the people that do belong to him are commanded to work together to really manifest the presence of God in the city. One of the deep convictions that we have is that what makes Christianity Christianity is the incarnation. That's what distinguishes it from every other world religion. And the mystery of unity is that the closer God's leaders come to one another, I believe, the closer God becomes to the city. It's reflected in Psalm 133, this idea that God's presence is really manifested in our unity. To see a movement take place, movements are always led by leaders, of course. You have to start with ideally a community of leaders that have a shared vision. One of the things that we really believe is that what we do together is actually more important than what we do. The nature of Christianity is so communal. One of the challenges we have in the West, particularly in the US, kind of a hyper individualism. And if we're going to lead movements, we really have to get the pronouns right. Jesus says that I will build my church, and we need to understand whose church it is. And we need to have a different definition of success. Success should not just be the size of my organization, the size of my church, the size of my budget. We need to take a macro perspective and really ask the question, how is the city doing as a result of the faith community's presence and leadership and initiative and sense of mission? So a lot of this has to do with orientation, how we think about it. The other thing I would say about what's really helped spark movements is really good research. We have found that really good research compels action. Part of why Tim Keller and I worked together on the Church Multiplication Alliance, we had a couple convictions. One is that in the 1980s, there was only 9,000 people out of an island of 1.5 million that were actively attending Bible-believing churches, really less than 1%. And the second conviction was that churches 10 years and younger are 8 times more effective reaching new people than churches 10 years and older. And when we commissioned this alliance and then we commissioned this research in 2009, we saw that 39% of all the churches in Manhattan had been started since 9/11 in 2001. That's really what accelerated the movement, where all these new churches. And we've just seen that happen in city after city all over the world. That's partly why the work of City to City is so important. They've actually planted 750 churches around the world. It's really one of the great stories of the last century. It's a great legacy of Tim's life and work. And we need to celebrate. We need to celebrate what we see God doing in other people's and other leaders' lives and organizations. We just need to celebrate the fact that God is at work, and we either get to be a part of it or we get to observe it. So,
Mac, you mentioned a few times the transformation that you've seen within the city over the years. I'd be curious, what significant changes have you observed in New York City, the spiritual and social landscape, since you moved there?
the two things I've already referenced was the great decline in the murder rate, violence. That really was a palpable reality for us in the early to mid 80s. Even for us personally, we had a drug murder in our neighborhood. My wife was robbed at a laundromat with hanging on to 3 of our kids. And so all this is really quite real. We've had things stolen from our car. So just seeing some of that reality begin to change. Cities are always going to have crime. Cities are always going to have this. But again, we saw some palpable changes. The other thing that I would say we saw is we've seen a lot of initiatives really begin to take off. One of the great crises in our city and in especially US cities is the crisis of the foster care system. Foster care really is the ground zero of a lot of our social ills. Young people coming out of the foster care system are really prone to not finish education, to become incarcerated, to get involved in sex trafficking. And currently, there's a new initiative called Care Portal, and churches are beginning to connect together to collaborate with city agencies to begin to care for children in the foster care system. We have 8,000 children in the foster care system. And it's a fantastic model. And part of why it works is that leaders have been educated about the need. They've been shown practical ways to engage and to get involved. So that's been one of the fruits of this relationship in this movement. Another sign of this, I would say, has been in some of the partnership with national organizations. In the year 2005, we began to host the Global Leadership Summit in New York. It had not had a presence prior to that. We brought the GLS. The first year that GLS came, we had 7 sites that were 70% minority attendance. One of the great secrets about the church in New York is that we are 90% either minority or immigrant. So it's a very different landscape. And because of our work, we've been able to bring in partners like a World Vision and like a GLS, like a Care Portal, and we're able to provide opportunities for leaders to scale their impact. One of the things that we've developed is what I would call the anatomy of a movement. And the anatomy of a movement has 2 parts. You have a foundational element, and then you have what I would call an operating element. The foundational element are the corporate spiritual disciplines that people share together. So in our model, we have Tuesday afternoon Zoom prayers. We've been doing this every Tuesday afternoon for the last 5 years. It began during COVID. We have our prayer summit in January. So that's our prayer rhythm. But part of the foundation is always creating a pipeline for leadership. Almost every great spiritual movement was started by someone either at or under the age of 28. Nicholas Count von Zinzendorf began the Moravian movement at the age of 27. Mother Teresa got her calling at the age of 17. Uh, Martin Luther King Jr. began to lead the civil rights movement at the age of 26. So these are all foundational elements of movements. But the operational side of a movement really has, in my opinion, 3 characteristics. You have a network of leaders and churches that want to do something consequential together. And then they are stirred by a big idea. So one of our initial big ideas was to see Christianity grow to 10% in Manhattan. Right now, we're working on a big vision across Asia. We want to impact 500 cities across Asia. So it's a big idea. And then the third part of the operating system is you have a world-class partner. We were able to sponsor 11,000 children because of the work of World Vision over 40 years. We were able to plant hundreds of churches because of the world-class expertise of a group like City to City. We're able to do our work across Asia because we've got lots of organizations that are doing lots of great things and they really want to work together. So that's a little bit of how we see movements unfold and a little bit of the architecture of that.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate those 2 anatomies, the foundational and the operational elements that are required within a movement. I feel like that's a really helpful framing. I would like to dive in just a little bit to the pipeline of leadership. You mentioned the need to raise up younger leaders because that's the space where they're receiving their callings. How do you go about developing younger leaders?
We're very intentional as we find younger leaders. We give them a platform, the opportunity to speak in the context of our larger events. We're just starting this September an initiative called Advanced Leadership Intensive for under 30 leaders. We did the ALI program for senior leaders for about 12, 13 years. Very powerful. We had probably 600 or 700 leaders that went through that training. But we're also beginning to really design a lot of our programming with the objective in mind that half of the attendees will be leaders under the age of 30. We'll have our 15th movement day in October of this year. And in the month of June, I had 50 one-on-one meetings with leaders. I said to these leaders, this is our model. We'd like you to bring 5 senior leaders, 5 under 30 leaders. And basically, we architected our gathering with that methodology in view. And so that really how we see this going forward. And it's a global crisis. The book that you've been reading, Disruptive Gospel, I talked to leaders in Cairo. This was probably 8 years or so ago, or 9 years ago. And at that time, they said their greatest challenge was not ISIS, but it was young people leaving the church. I would commend an essay that's very powerful. It's on the US context, but I think it's fairly consistent with what's happening globally. The article is called The Great Opportunity, and it's online, thegreatopportunity.org. And Josh Crossman, in his article, makes the analysis that the US church is losing 1 million young people a year. And if something doesn't change, that half of our churches will close by the year 2050. So that's a kind of a 5-alarm fire for the US church. But I think many parts of the globe are not that different with that challenge. So that his research again is very compelling, and he offers kind of 5 antidotes to this trend, which includes church planning. It includes the prioritization of sending young leaders on mission trips. Talks about new media and the importance of that. He talks about work among the poor, and then he talks about long-term witness in the university, because the university really shapes the minds of the future. And in the US, we're probably less than 5%, maybe less than 2% Christian faculty in these great universities. So there's a need to establish a much more robust presence in that space.
So, I mean, what practical steps should churches or ministries take to develop leaders within their space?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, depending on which part of the world uh, uh, a church or a leader is, they need to do really good research on available opportunities. Like in the US, for example, I really encourage churches that have college age leaders, send them to gatherings like Urbana, really have a strategy around a short-term missions initiative, give people that exposure. There's a phenomenal movement emerging in Asia, which is called Arise Asia, and it's rallying young leaders across 50 to 100 cities in Asia to create their own missions expressions. Young leaders are being challenged to go spend a year among an unreached people group. It's a fantastic vision. It's growing very rapidly. There's the work of Yuri Kriel and Next Move. That's a kind of a parallel network of younger leaders. So there are these networks that can be linked into. And I think with the younger leader development, a lot of it has to do with just the importance of one-on-one relationship, investment, mentoring. I think it's important to provide opportunities for young leaders to have these extended immersive experiences, whether it's like a conference or a missions trip, but really with the idea to invite God to speak into the minds and hearts of these young leaders. I took my 17-year-old daughter with me on my first trip to East Africa back in 2002, and she was 17 at the time. And I was reading the biography of Mother Teresa during the trip. It was interesting to me to see how Mother Teresa got her call as a young woman in Albania to go to India as a nun. And then even in my own daughter's life, to see this awakening in her to care for widows and orphans. And she had made subsequent trips back to Africa, helped with our World Vision Project for several years, and just a real confidence that God will speak to younger leaders when they're in these environments and opportunities. So,
So, Mac, you mentioned a few times Movement Day, which I know is an organization that you pioneered. But seeing as we're on the Lausanne Movement podcast, there's almost a myth. There's a story about Movement Day, and I don't know whether it's true or not. And so I would love to hear from you. How did Movement Day begin? Because I've heard constantly that it began or was birthed out of or something sparked at the Cape Town Congress. So I'd love to hear from your side how it began.
Movement Day actually just barely precedes the Cape Town Congress. The roots of Movement Day, as I shared earlier, was the research from the Church Multiplication Alliance that Tim Keller and I started. So the research, we commissioned it in 2009. And when we saw the results of the research, at that time, the growth in the Manhattan churches was 300%. So it was that research that compelled us to create this first gathering, which was September 30th, 2010. Cape Town Congress was like 3 weeks later. So Tim and I were there, and Tim was a keynote speaker. He did a teaching on the book of Jonah. And Tim and I met with a marketplace leader, Bob Dahl, who is now the board chair of Lausanne, also our board chair at movement.org. And we invited Bob to join our work to create what we call the three-legged stool of minister, missionary, and marketplace leader. And by the beginning of 2011, Bob agreed to do so. And so Bob's been on this journey. So Bob was really deeply involved with this by the second year of Movement Day. And the growth of Movement Day, to understand it, we met every year in New York from 2010, 2015. Our first Movement Day outside of the US actually was in Pretoria, working with the Doxa Deo community. And we had several leaders that came there from around the world. We also met in Port-au-Prince in 2015 in Haiti. But the real turning point in the Movement Day story globally was 2016, We had Movement Day Global Cities in New York City at the Javits Center, which I think is the largest convention center in the world at that time. We had 3,000 leaders, 400 cities, 95 nations that participated. And I think it was the largest missions conference in New York in 100 years. Coming out of that experience, and again, that was a 3-day gathering, and leaders were sufficiently immersed in the vision that they really wanted to adopt the vision back in their own
Mm.
cities. So by that next year, we had Movement Day expressions in places like Chennai, India, Hong Kong, China. We had a great gathering in London in 2017. There was a road show in Africa that year, Cape Town, Pretoria, Durban, and Nairobi. And so it really took off, and it continued to grow until we had our 10-year gathering 2020 during COVID online, but we had 900 cities participate. So it really began to take off. I began my formal Lausanne role in 2013, where I became the co-catalyst for cities. And so the Lausanne community was a good fit for us because we were able to bring Lausanne leaders. In fact, in 2016, Jean-Paul Remp was the Lausanne leader for Europe, and he brought 276 Europeans to New York. I think we had at least 300 from Africa that came. I think Durban brought 100 leaders just as one city.
My hometown.
Yeah, that really happened. That really caused things to accelerate and grow. And we think we're on a trajectory to be in 1,000 cities within the next decade.
Amazing. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Movement Day? I think it'd be great for our audience to hear what you guys are doing right now and your vision into the future.
Yeah, for those that aren't familiar with Movement Day, when leaders gather for a Movement Day, we're really trying to answer three questions. The first question we're trying to answer is, what are the greatest challenges facing your city right now? So that's a bit of a research question. The second question is, what do we want to be true in 10 years? We call that our North Star. What is our North Star? When we started Movement Day, our North Star was to see 10% of Manhattan attending evangelical churches. And then the third question is, what do we need to do together practically this next year? And the actual structure of a Movement Day varies a little bit. A traditional Movement Day is one day. It might be a morning session where you have vision casting, Bible teaching, worship, stories that are told about the research. One of our high values is we really want leaders to become subject matter experts on their cities. So that's a high value within the Movement Day world. We really strongly encourage good research. And then typically in the afternoon of a Movement Day, you would have people that meet by their interest. It might be church planners, it might be marketplace leaders, it might be educators, it might be people who want to affect policy. And then those groups are really encouraged to design whatever it is they think God wants them to do. So Movement Day really is more of a consultation than a conference. We really want people that are coming to learn from each other. We believe that whatever God wants to do in a city, He's already put in the hearts of the leaders in that city to work on together. So that's a pretty classic Movement Day expression. Some Movement Day expressions are half day, some are multi day. Some region of the world start with a leadership dinner to cast vision for the city. We're getting started in the Middle East right now, and we've had great gatherings in Dubai. We had our first meeting in Arabic in February in Beirut, and they have a fantastic leadership team there. They've already had follow-up meetings with next gen leaders, with marketplace leaders, and even though they're young in this model, they're moving along really well. Very encouraged to see what God is doing there.
So I'm sure that there are going to be some people who are listening who are inspired by what you're saying. How can they join in? How can they become part of Movement Day?
They can contact us at our website, movement.org. We have a monthly gathering called the Movement Day Learning Community. We always meet second Thursday on Zoom at 7 in the morning Eastern Time. And every month there's a different story that we share the story of what God is doing around the world. Like this month coming up, we're going to talk about what God is doing in Australia. Fantastic collaboration there with the leaders there, Ian Shelton and his team, who's been leading in this space for 40 years, working with city to city, working with Salvation Army. Ian's got a new book that's out called God is a City Builder. We really want to grow the ecosystem of relationships, ideas, best practices. So that happens every second Thursday. We've been doing this now. We're coming up on our 11th anniversary. So well over 130 gatherings in a row. So that's a way to connect. We also have a training initiative called Movement Day Scholars, which is a 10-hour per year in person or in Zoom training with some book reports that can be done as a cohort. It's a tuition free model, and it really helps stimulate and inform methodology about how to do this in your own city. And then, of course, we can do some personal coaching on how to create a movement day expression within a city. And the beauty of it is that it's not prescriptive. There's really freedom for leaders to design whatever makes the most sense for their city. And we've had great variations on the model. We celebrate however God leads leaders to design this expression in their own place.
Yeah. Well, Mac, thank you for those resources. I'm going to be sure to put that into the show notes. So for those who are listening, they can go into the show notes and find that. Mac, I want to circle back to a conversation we were having a little bit earlier about collaboration. One of the big moves that Lausanne is pushing towards is collaborative action. And I'd be curious to hear from you. It sounds like you have been doing a lot of collaboration with people all around the world. Could you share a story or stories where you faced the biggest challenges? What have they been, and what can churches or other organizations learn from you?
I want to point to some foundational understanding of effective collaboration. Stanford University did some great work on the idea of what's called a backbone organization. And successful collaborations have either a leader or an organization that functions in this backbone capacity. Backbone organizations typically convene people to come together, help create an agenda, help with communication, with resources. And in our model, the centrality of praying together. So this, for collaborations to work, there has to be a real depth of cohesion. That's really important. And as I think about some of the collaborative models we're doing, one of the fast growing works for us is in Brazil. Brazil really has, in the last 50 years, been one of the great stories of church history and the growth of evangelicalism there. Very passionate leaders in Brazil. And one of the collaborations is a training. And in fact, it's with our Scholars Training Initiative. We're working with an existing national organization in Brazil called ALEF, ALEF. They have a national congress every October in the city of Natal. And we're interacting with institutions. There's a university in Brazil called Mackenzie University, and they're beginning to work with us. We've had meetings in their space, and it's somewhat early stage, but we're envisioning this idea of training 500 scholars from 50 cities across Brazil. It will involve these training institutes, faculty, curriculum that we've created. We're part of the Aleph gathering when they do meet in late October. So that's a bit of how these collaborations take shape. It's identifying existing assets. We describe it as aggregating to accelerate. We don't want to unnecessarily recreate anything. It's getting leaders and organizations to work together better and smarter rather than to operate independently of one another. So the training movement there is one of our models. In India, one of the things that's been very exciting has been to see the growth of an entrepreneurism track in India. India faces the challenge of working in a Hindu nationalist governmental context, which is not allowing donations from outside of India to come into India through traditional means. And so a lot of these organizations are creating for-profit entities that is a collaboration with entrepreneurs and other organizations so that they can really meet some of the needs that need to be met in that context.
So could you share some challenges you faced in collaborating with others?
Well, there's always going to be some environmental challenges. The economics of a collaboration are always going to be challenging because, we tend to have a view of scarcity in terms of resources. So there's can be a sense of being competitive over resources, who gets what, how do we divide that up? So it takes some thoughtful, mature understanding of how you allocate resources to a collaboration. I think the other barrier is always going to be an insufficient level of trust. If people don't trust each other, then they will tend to be suspicious. I think another barrier is the issue of limited time. And the question that a leader is always going to ask is, do I achieve more by collaborating, or do I achieve more by just going in my own direction, having greater control of my own time? And that needs to be really thought through, because my conviction is that if a collaboration is well designed, then the impact of it will be exponential. When I remember having this conversation with Tim Keller in the year 2000 in a restaurant, and we were talking about the spiritual needs of Manhattan, and Tim said, Manhattan needs all kinds of new churches, and we know they're not all going to be Presbyterian. So he felt like we needed to connect to the other faith communities that could be envisioned to do this together. And Tim was exactly right. By inviting these leaders into this model, they were resourced in a way they wouldn't have been resourced any other way. The power of a good collaboration is that you draw an expertise that could not be accessed in any other way. So that's really the spirit of that.
So you mentioned that a collaboration needs to be well designed. So for those who are listening, who may very well come out of the Fourth Lausanne Congress in Incheon, excited about collaboration and developing some sort of collaborative group into an area that they're passionate about, what advice would you give them for a well-designed collaboration?
A couple things. I think as you get started, you ideally you want to have the permission of the top leadership in your organization to go down this path. So you feel like you're empowered with permission. The senior leader may not have the discretionary time to be in all the meetings, which is understandable, but it's important that these leaders understand and really welcome the value of this model. It really helps if you have a neutral, skilled facilitator to help guide the conversation. That way, it prevents the sense that people are being steered to do just what one organization wants to do. You want to have as much of a neutral identity. If you don't have a person like that, then you obviously want to have the most trusted person in the meeting be the facilitator of the meeting. And with the understanding that this person really is eager to hear the ideas of others that are outside their organization. So that's important. I think good collaborations are built on the foundation of good research, because again, good research will compel action. And then the other thing I think is important, and this is what we've done in a lot of our Movement Day work, is once you have a plan that's developing, it's really good to have a meeting with as many stakeholders from the city as possible in the meeting where you can share your results. You can say, this is what we're hearing and learning. And then even at that time, invite people to put their fingerprints on an idea. One of the resources that we've created is this book, New York Disrupted. And it really was the creation of a decadal plan with the engagement of about 80 leaders from 22 organizations. And our methodology, and it's available online, it's just newyorkdisrupted.com. But really what happened is I interviewed 22 leaders and I asked them this question. If you were successful in impacting the number of people you want to impact by the year 2030, what does that number look like? And the aggregate number from this group was actually 1 million people. I would have never imagined that if I just sat down with a piece of paper and tried to do my own estimating. But by doing the hard work of research, interviews, you really uncover some amazing things. And God is a God of revelation, and that He really wants leaders to enter into His dream for the city, His dream for their organization. And taking this posture is really helpful. We also, a great theological model is the book of Nehemiah, because it begins with a leader's burden for their city in the opening chapter and the whole prayer and confession. But I found the great learning from Nehemiah was that he spent about 4 months thinking, praying, fasting for the city. And then after he got permission from the king to go back to Jerusalem, it only took 52 days to complete the wall. So this idea that Nehemiah spent twice as much time thinking, praying, strategizing as actually executing the vision is that God really wants to give us revelation on what He wants to do and to achieve these kind of extraordinary results. And it certainly doesn't always happen that way, but there's some really good lessons from that historical model.
Well, Mac, this has been such a rich conversation. You're just dripping with facts and ideas and thoughts that have been obviously well thought through. And so I really appreciate your time being with us on the podcast. So we're going to have to begin to wrap up. Before we do, I would love to hear from you. You sound like a man with vision. And I would love to hear, what is your vision for the next decade? What are you excited about?
Well, I'm excited about what God is doing in really some of the hard places around the planet, places like India, Indonesia, the Middle East, parts of Africa, Southern Europe, Latin America, where there's a lot of poverty. God is just raising up some extraordinary leaders. And our vision really is to be a Barnabas to these leaders. You want to come alongside, we want to resource, empower, give them opportunity to lead. We would love to have leadership communities in 1,000 cities over the next 10 years that are not only working together, but really becoming friends with leaders in other parts of the world. Much of this is already happening at a very organic level. But part of the power of Lausanne is to have these rhythmic meetings with younger leaders and the congresses over time. And it's really building this spiritual and relational muscle. We really feel like if we can see God do in the 21st century what he did in the first century, it'd be very powerful. Because just, I saw a data point last week that said over 80, I think it was 83% of all the people in the world outside of Christianity are in Asia. And so we need to really lean into some of this together as a global church and be very intentional, thoughtful, very deliberate, radical to make a difference. We've all got one life to live and we want to be as consequential as we can.
So, are there any resources you'd like to encourage our listeners to explore if they're resonating with the topics that we've been speaking about today? Are there any resources that you can recommend to us?
If persons can only read one book, I would encourage the book called Why Cities Matter. It's a short read, but it really captures a lot of this really well written. Tim Keller's kind of classic work and all of this is Center Church. It's a little rigorous and academic, but it really captures Tim's thinking. Tim may be the best thinker on this front in 500 years. Just been a real gift to the church. Ray Baki's book, A Theology as Big as the City, a fantastic resource. I would also suggest that article, The Great Opportunity. A couple of our books that I think are helpful. One is A Disruptive Gospel that you're reading. That gives a bit of a global snapshot. And then New York Disrupted is really the New York story, and that's available online, newyorkdisrupted.com. So those are a few places to get started.
Thank you so much. I'll be sure to put that in the show notes. Any closing thoughts as we close off the podcast?
Yeah, just really excited about all the ways that God is stirring around the world, and really invite leaders to lean into this topic. And if there's any point of interest, to connect with us or connect with others doing this kind of work. We're a pretty informal but substantial network globally, and lots of great leaders and practitioners all over the world. I really do think that it is part of everybody's discipleship to really see themselves not only as citizens of the kingdom of God, but as citizens of the city in which God has drawn them, and to really believe that God has called you to your city for a reason, and to really discern whatever that means.
Well, Mac, I've really been challenged myself to consider what is going on in my own city. God has placed me here. God has got a call for me right where I'm being planted. And so I'm leaving this conversation richer than I was before we came in. So I want to thank you personally. And I know that on behalf of the listeners, you've added value today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for you and for the Lausanne work.